I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, monsters, and all sorts of creatures that go bump in the night were just stories to me. That is, until I stumbled upon the dead werewolf. It was late in the evening when I decided to go for a shortcut through the forest. Foolish, I know, but I was in a hurry to get back home. The sky was dark and ominous, with thick clouds covering the full moon. I could feel the chill in the air as I made my way deeper into the forest, the trees towering around me like silent sentinels. Suddenly, I heard a noise. It sounded like low growling, coming from behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and continued walking. But the growling persisted, growing louder and closer. My heart began to race as I quickened my pace. I could feel something watching me, lurking in the shadows. I desperately wanted to turn back, but I almost out of the forest and I didn't want to waste any more time. That's when I saw it. It was clearing ahead, under the faint light of the moon, lay a huge, monstrous creature. Its body was covered in matted, dark fur, and its face was contorted in a gruesome snarl. Most tellingly, the creature had a human-like form, with long arms and clawed hands. I froze, unable to look away from the gruesome sight. I knew what it was, a werewolf. I've heard the stories, but I've never thought they could be real. And now, I was staring at a dead one. I wanted to run, to get as far away from the dead werewolf as possible, but something compelled me to stay. I slowly walked towards it, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I got closer, I could see that the creature's body was twisted and torn, as if it had to put up a fight before it died. That's when I noticed the strange markings on its fur. It looked like someone had painted symbols all over the werewolf's body. I couldn't make sense of them, but they gave me an eerie feeling. I suddenly realized that I was not alone. I could hear a faint whispering, like a soft chant coming from around me. I looked around frantically, but I couldn't see no one. And then I saw them. A group of hooded figures standing in the shadows, their faces obscured by their cloaks. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The figures began to approach me, the chants growing louder and more intense. They were speaking in a language I didn't understand, but I knew it was ancient and powerful. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I knew I had to leave, but my limbs wouldn't move. It was as if I was under a spell. And then, the unthinkable happened. The dead werewolf began to twitch, and slowly it rose to its feet. I watched in horror as the creature turned its head towards me, its yellow eyes flashing with a fierce intensity. It let out a howl that sent shivers down my spine, and it was then that I knew I was in grave danger. The hooded figures continued their chant, the voices now joined by the werewolf's howls. The creature started to advance towards me, its body contorting and changing shape as it did. Before my very eyes, the dead werewolf was coming back to life. I was paralyzed with fear as the werewolf lunged at me with its claws extended. But then, a loud bang echoed through the forest. I could see a figure standing a few feet behind the werewolf, holding a shotgun. It was my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins. He had been out hunting and must have heard the commotion. The blast from his gun seemed to break the spell that was holding me, and I took off running as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't stop until I reached my house, where I promptly locked all doors and the windows. I couldn't believe what just happened. I stumbled across a group of werewolf worshippers performing a ritual on a dead werewolf. And somehow, I had caught their attention. I shuddered to think what it could have happened if Mr. Jenkins hadn't been there to save me. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. I did some research and found out that the markings on the werewolf's body were symbols used in a dark ritual to bring the dead back to life. I had witnessed it firsthand. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as the werewolf cult was still keeping an eye on me. I started having nightmares, with some hooded figures and a dead werewolf haunting my dreams. I knew I had to do something about it. There have been numerous sightings of werewolves in the area over the years, but they were always dismissed as just stories or hoax. But now, I knew the truth. The werewolves were real, and there was a cult dedicating to bring them back to life. I knew I had to take an action. I contacted the authorities and shared all the information I had gathered. They launched an investigation and were able to shut down the werewolf cult, arresting its members and putting an end to their dangerous rituals. But even though the cult was no longer a threat, I couldn't shake off the fear and paranoia that had consumed me. I couldn't go to the forest anymore, and every time I heard a howl at the night, I was filled with dread. I learned a valuable lesson from my encounter with the dead werewolf. The supernatural may seem like a mere folktale, but sometimes it can be all too real. And I would never underestimate its powers again. I've been a trucker for long as I can remember, driving long distances on the open road with nothing but the soft hum of my engine to keep me company has always been my idea of freedom. But little did I know that one fateful night would change everything. It was a dark and stormy night, with a heavy rain pounding on my windshield as I drove through a deserted stretch of the highway. I had just made a delivery and was heading back home when I noticed a figure on the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched and shivering in the pouring rain. Without a second thought, I stopped my truck and opened the door, inviting her in. She climbed into the passenger seat, her clothes clinging to her body as she let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice shaky. "I've been walking for hours and I had no idea where I am." I nodded and offered her a blanket to warm up, as she wrapped it around her. I couldn't help but notice how pale and haggard she looked. Her hair tangled and her eyes were bloodshot, but I brushed it off, thinking she must have been through a rough time. As we continued driving, she told me that she was running away from an abusive relationship and was trying to get her as far away as possible. I felt a pang of sympathy for her and offered to drive her to the nearest truck stop where she could get some rest. But as we drove, she suddenly went quiet. I turned to check on her, and that's when I noticed her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were no longer bloodshot, but black and lifeless. Her face was controlled with a twisted grin, revealing sharp teeth. I slammed on the brakes, and my heart racing in panic. "What the hell?" I shouted, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. The woman cackled, her voice now deep and menacing. "You should have not stopped, Tucker. Now you belong to me." I tried to open the door and run, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped in my own truck with this demon. She lunged at me, her claws digging into my skin as she whispered in my ear, "You will be my pawn, my vessel, and together we'll drive for all eternity." In a desperate attempt to escape, I reached out to my pocket knife and sliced her arm. To my horror, the black tar-like liquid oozed instead of blood. But It was enough to startle her, and I managed to push her off me and run out the truck. The rain had slowed down, but the wind was howling as I ran into the darkness. As I looked back, I saw the demon emerge from the truck, her body contorting and morphing into a human form. It let out a spine-chilling roar and began to chase after me. I ran for my life, my heart pounding in my chest as I could feel her breath on my neck. Every step I took felt like I was running in slow motion, the demon gaining on me with every stride. But then I saw the lights in the distance. The truck stopped. With all of my strength, I sprint towards it with my lungs burning and my legs feel like lead. As I reached the safety of the lit area, I could feel the demon's grasp slip away. I collapsed on the ground, catching my breath and thanking whatever forces of nature had saved me. After that night, I quit my job and swore to never drive on that stretch of the highway again. But the memory of the demon still haunts me. It was as if she had marked me as her target, and I could feel her presence everywhere I went. I started to see her in my nightmares, looking around the corners and whispering my name. I would wake up in cold sweats, my heart racing and my body trembling. My once peaceful life had turned into a never-ending nightmare. I tried to seek help, but no one believed my story. They all thought that I was hallucinating or making it up for attention. But I knew the truth. That demon had chosen me and wasn't going to stop until she claimed my soul. And then, one night, she came for me. I was standing outside my house, lost in the thought when I saw her emerge from the shadows. She was just as terrifying as I remembered, her eyes fixed on me as she approached. "You belong to me, Taka. It's time to fulfill our eternal contract," she hissed, reaching out to grab me. But then, something miraculous happened. A bold strike of lightning struck her, causing her body to disintegrate into ash. The storm intensified, as if celebrating her demise. I was in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But then, I saw a figure standing in the distance. A woman with piercing blue eyes, surrounded by a bright golden aura. She walked towards me and put a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft yet commanding. "Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. You are free now." And with that, she disappeared, leaving me in awe with a newfound sense of peace. I never saw the demon again. I would finally live my life without fear. But I will never forget that night. The night I encountered pure evil and managed to get out alive. And to this day, I wonder if that woman who saved me was just a pass-away or just something more powerful, watching and protecting us from the darkness. I've always loved camping. The fresh air, the beautiful scenery, and the scenes of adventure have always drawn me in. So, when my friends and I decided to plan a camping trip in the forest, I was ecstatic. Little did I know, this camping trip would turn into a terrifying experience that would haunt me for years to come. We arrived at the campground at the edge of the forest, our tents and supplies in tow. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the trees. We quickly set up our tents and built a fire, eager to start our adventure in the morning. As we stood around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The forest seemed quiet, too quiet. Not even the sounds of crickets or rustling leaves could be heard. But I pushed this thought aside, thinking I was just being paranoid. It wasn't until we settled into our tents for the night that things started to take a sinister turn. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a low growl, but I brushed it off as an animal and closed my eyes. But the noise didn't stop. It grew louder and closer, sending shivers down my spine. I could hear my friends stirring in the tents, also sensing that something was off. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, my heart racing. My friends confirmed that they heard it too, and we all huddled together in one tent, afraid to go outside and face whatever was making that noise. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that the growling finally stopped. We were grateful to see the light of the day, but we knew we had to investigate the source of the noise. After grabbing our flashlights, we cautiously made our way out of the tent and into the forest. The once beautiful and sincere surroundings now felt ominous and foreboding. Despite our fear, we continued on, determined to find what was lurking in the shadows. We followed the sound of the growling until we came across a cave. It was a small entrance, barely visible through the thick bush. But the growling was coming from inside, with a mixture of curiosity and terror. We cautiously entered the cave. The air was musty and damp, and our flashlights barely pierced through the darkness. As we made our way deeper into the cave, the growling grew louder and more intense. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't feel my palms growing sweaty. Finally, we reached a large chamber, and our flashlights illuminated a pair of glowing eyes staring back at us. We stood frozen, facing a massive wolf-like creature, its fur matted and eyes filled with malice. Its growls echoed throughout the chamber, sending chills down our spines. In a panic, we turned and ran, the creature's snarls and howls ringing in our ears. We ran for what it felt like hours until we finally reached the safety of our campsite. We quickly packed our belongings and left, never looking back. The experience left us unshaken and terrified, and we promised to never speak of it again. But as the years went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched whenever I stepped into the forest. Every rustle of leaves or howl of the wind felt like a reminder of that terrifying night. It wasn't until years later, when I decided to go camping again, that I would come to face with that creature once more. This time, I was alone. I had chosen a different campground, far from the forest where my friends and I had encountered the monster. But as I set up my tent, the feeling of unease returned. I pushed it aside, determined to not let my fear control me. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard the familiar low growl. This time, I knew I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight and bravely made my way towards the source of the sound. My heart was pounding as I entered the forest, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I could hear the growling getting louder, and my steps grew slower with each passing second. Finally, I reached the same cave from years ago. The monster was still there, its glowing eyes staring back at me with a mixture of anger and hunger. I could feel my body freeze in fear, but my curiosity took over. I wanted to know what this creature was and why it had haunted me for so long. With trembling hands, I slowly approached the creature, its growls growing louder and more aggressive. But instead of attacking me, it simply retreated to the back of the cave as it was afraid of me. But as my flashlight illuminated the back of the cave, I saw something that ran my blood cold. There, lying in the corner, was the skeletal remains of a human. It was then I realized that this creature was not a wolf, but a werewolf. In that moment, everything clicked in place. The growls, the sense of being watched, the fear that had followed me for years. It was all because of this creature, this werewolf, who had been terrorizing the forest for who knows how long. I quickly beckoned away from the forest, my mind racing with fear and shock. I ran back to my campsite and packed my things and determined to leave this cursed place and never return. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. I was relieved to have finally uncovered the truth behind that terrifying camping trip, but sad that it took me so many years to face my fears and find closure. To this day, I haven't told anyone about my encounter with the werewolf. Some say it was all in my head, a figment of my imagination. But I know the truth, and it will haunt me forever. The forest may still hold many mysteries and dangers, but I know that I have faced the scariest one of all. I always thought my neighbor, Mr. Blackwood, was a strange man. Growing up, I would often see him sitting alone on his front porch, staring blankly into space with a creepy smile on his face. I would also notice the occasional person walking into his house, but they never seemed to come out. I brushed it off as just my overreactive imagination, until one night when I heard the screams. It was a cold and stormy night, and I was at home alone. I was sitting in my living room, engrossed in this scary movie, when suddenly I heard a blood-curdling scream pierce through the quiet neighborhood. At first, I thought it was just a scene from the movie, but the scream continued, getting louder and more intense. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks in my mind. But then, the scream turned into a cry for help, and I knew it was real. I quickly turned off the TV and opened my window, trying to locate the source of the screams. It was coming from Mr. Blackwood's house. Without thinking twice, I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside towards his house. As I approached his front door, I could feel my heart racing with fear and adrenaline. However, when I pressed my ear against the door, the screams suddenly stopped. It was all dead quiet. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to knock on the door or just go back home. But before I could make a decision, the front door slowly creaked open. I shone my flashlight into the dark hallway, but there was no one there. I cautiously stepped inside, the musty smell hitting my nostrils. The house was eerily quiet, and I could feel an unsettling presence looming over me. I followed the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs, as if someone was rushing towards the bedroom. With each step, the floorboards creaked under my weight, making me feel like I was being watched. I reached the bedroom and slowly pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw inside will forever haunt me. Mr. Blackwood was standing in front of the window, clenching a knife in his hand. But it wasn't the knife that made my blood run cold. It was the person laying on the bed, bound and gagged, with a look of pure terror in their eyes. It was my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had always thought Mr. Blackwood was a harmless but creepy man. I would have imagined him capable of such heinous acts. But before I could process everything, he turned around and faced me with that same creepy smile I had seen on his face countless times before. "Hello, my dear neighbor," he said in a chillingly calm voice. "I've been expecting you." My mind was racing, trying to come up with an escape plan. But before I could move, he lunged towards me with a knife. I let out a scream and ran out of the room as fast as I could. I could hear his heavy footsteps chasing me after as I sprinted down the stairs, almost tripping in the process. I could feel his presence looming close behind me, his crazed laughter echoing through the house. I finally reached the front door and flung it open, running out into the storming night. I could hear him shouting and cursing behind me, but I didn't dare to turn around. I ran all the way to my house, my heart pounding in my ears. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to catch my breath and make sense of everything that had just happened. I couldn't believe my neighbor was a deranged murderer. I should have trusted my instincts all those years ago. But the horror wouldn't end there. For the rest of the night, I could hear strange noises coming from Mr. Blackwood's house. I could hear footsteps pacing around, doors slamming shut, and even more screams. And then, it all finally stopped. The next morning, I called the police and told them everything that had happened. They searched Mr. Blackwood's house, and what they found was beyond terrifying. The basement was filled with torture devices and the bodies of his victims. It turned out he had been luring people into his house for years, never letting them leave. Mr. Carmichael was the lucky one. She had somehow managed to escape and run to my neighbor's house for help. Others were not so fortunate. I was lucky to have survived that night, and to have finally exposed Mr. Blackwood for the monster he truly was. But even though he was behind bars, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still not right. I would often catch glimpses of Mr. Blackwood staring at me through the prison bars, that same creepy smile never leaving his face. I couldn't help but wonder if it was still somehow haunting me from beyond the grave. But the worst of it all was the nightmares. Every night, I would dream of being trapped inside Mr. Blackwood's house, hearing the screams of his victims echoing through the walls. I would see his face, twisted into that same twisted smile as he chased me after with a knife. I became paranoid, constantly checking my locks and looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. It wasn't until I moved away from that neighborhood and started therapy that the nightmares had finally stopped. To this day, I still shudder at the memory of that stormy night and the horrors that took place in my neighbor's house. It goes to show, you may never truly know what's hidden behind closed doors, and the people you think you know may be hiding dark secrets. Trust your instincts, because you never know. The creepy neighbor next door may be far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. It's been another long, uneventful shift at McDonald's. The smell of French fries and burger meat fills the air as I scrub down the counter for the up 10th time today. I'm Frank, by the way, A middle-aged man who's been stuck in this dead-end job for far too long. It's not that I mind the work, really. Like right now, for instance. The restaurant is closed for the night, and yet I can swear I hear faint voices coming from the back alley. They sound off. Like they're not coming from human mouths. My skin crawls as I glance at the clock. It's only been an hour since I locked up, but it feels like I've been here for hours. The air is thick with unnatural stillness, and the fluorescent lights flicker ominously. I tell myself it's nothing. That it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know something is wrong. Something is waiting for me. I turn my attention back to the counter, wiping down what it feels like a millionth time tonight. As I scrub, I can't help but notice the way the shadows dance along the wall, as if they're trying to form words or images. My heart races as I try to ignore them, focusing instead on the rhythmic sound of my scrub brush against the gleaming tile. Just as I'm about to finish up, I hear it. A low, guttural groan coming from the back alley. My heart seizes in my chest, and my breath catches in my throat. I know I should stay put, that I shouldn't go investigate. But curiosity gets the better of me. Slowly, carefully, I make my way through the empty dining area and into the alley. The air is colder out here, and the shadow seems to close in around me like a suffocating blanket. As I peer into the darkness, I swear I see movement at the corner of my eye. "Hello?" I call out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" There is no reply. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the nearby highway. I take a tentative step forward, my footsteps echoing hourly on the concrete. The groan comes again, this time louder and more urgent. I can't shake that feeling that whatever it is not human. And I have a horrible suspicion that it's waiting for me. As I press deeper into the alley, I notice strange symbols etched onto the walls, their meaning lost to time and decay. A chill runs down my spine as I realize they seem to form a map of some sort, leading deeper into the darkness. The groans grow more frantic with each step I take, as if whatever is making them is drawing closer. Finally, I round a corner and find myself face to face with a figure hunched over in the shadows. Its features are obscured by a tattered, hooded cloak, but I can make out the glimmer of unnatural eyes staring back at me. It lets out an agonized groan, and I feel an unsettling mixture of fear and sympathy wash over me. Whatever this thing is, it's in pain. "Who are you?" managed to croak, my voice barely audible over the throbbing of my heart. The figure in cloak cocks its head slightly, as if considering my question. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunges towards me, its arms outstretched and claws bared. I screamed as I feel the icy hands close around my throat, the world spinning out of control. As darkness begins to cloud my vision, I can feel its breath on my ear, whispering words I cannot understand. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure of my throat releases, and I collapse to the ground, gasping for air. When I look up, the figure in cloak is gone, vanished into the shadows once more. I struggled to my feet, still wheezing and coughing, and stumbled back into the restaurant. As I locked the door behind me, I can't help but wonder if whatever it was has truly gone, or if it's still out there waiting for its next chance to strike. The rest of the night passes in a blur of disbelief and confusion. I clean up the mess in the alley and looked up as usual, but I can't shake the feeling that something has fundamentally changed. The air seems charged with an electricity I can't quite describe, and the shadow seems to dance and writhe as if they were alive. I try to convince myself that it was a bad dream, or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But as I lay awake in bed the night, the memory of those glowing eyes and claws digging into my skin haunt my thoughts. The days turn into weeks, and I continue to work at the restaurant, growing more and more paranoid with each passing hour. I find myself checking the alleyway constantly, peering into the shadows for any sign of movement. I tell myself that it's for the safety of customers, but I know deep down it is because I'm afraid. Afraid for whatever it was will come back for me. The strange symbols in the alley continue to haunt my dreams, their meaning ever elusive. I try to research them online, but every search leads to a dead end. I even consider consulting with a historian or linguist, but something holds me back. I feel as if doing so would be admitting that what happened was real. And I am not quite ready for that yet. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and my friends and I were hanging out at a local coffee shop, sipping on iced lattes and sharing stories. Laughter filled the air as we relaxed in the warmth of the camaraderie, enjoying the simple pleasures of the weekend. Little did we know that our seemingly ordinary afternoon would unravel into a perplexing journey through the enigmatic corridors of the digital realm. As we bantered and laughed, the conversation took an unexpected turn when someone brought up the latest Snapchat craze. A mysterious user known as the Vanisher. Whispers of this digital enigma had reached our ears, with rumors suggesting that adding the Vanisher would lead to a particular chat experience, one that left participants with an unsettling sense of disquiet. Intrigued by our allure of the unknown, curiosity got the better of us. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, we collectively decided to add the Vanisher to our Snapchat friends list. Almost immediately, a chat window materialized on our screens, and the messages within were cryptic, filled with strange symbols and emojis that seemed to convey a message beyond our understanding. As we delved deeper into this conversation, the chat took an eerie turn. The messages, once abstract, became to display an uncanny knowledge of our lives, personal details that we hadn't shared on social media or anyone else. It was as if the Vanisher had unfettered access to a hidden trove of information about each one of us, leaving with a disconcerting sense of vulnerability. The once light-hearted atmosphere in the coffee shop shifted, morphing into a playful banter to uneasy contemplation. Nervous glances were exchanged among us as we questioned whether one of our own was behind this elaborate prank. However, as the messages continued to flow, it became evident that this was something beyond our control. An inexplicable intrusion into the sanity of our digital lives. The Vanisher's messages took an unsettling turn, describing our surroundings with an accuracy that sent shivers down our spines. It detailed the color of the coffee shop walls, the intricate pattern of the barista's apron, and even the tiles of the books neatly arranged on the shelves. Panic set as we all grappled with the disconcerting realization that we were being watched, although the source of this information remained elusive. In a desperate attempt to unravel the mystery, we mustered the courage to ask the Vanisher who they were and what they wanted. The response was chilling. A barrage of images and videos that depicted moments of their own lives. Birthday family gatherings and even private moments were laid bare in front of us. The Vanisher had transformed into an omniscient observer, peering into the most intimate corners of our existence. Fearful and desperate for answers, we collectively decided to take matters into our own hands. The unanimous decision was to delete the Vanisher from our Snapchat contacts, hoping that the digital connection world would put an end to the disconcerting intrusion. Miraculously, the chat disappeared, and the fleeting sense of relief washed over us. However, our respite was short-lived. The next day, as we reconvened at the coffee shop, a sense of foreboding settling upon us. Snap after snap arrived, each one containing real-life images of us, captured without our knowledge. The Vanisher had transcended the confines of the digital realm, infiltrating our lives to an unsettling degree. The boundary between the virtual and the tangible had blurred into an unsettling amalgamation of both, leaving us in a state of perpetual disarray. Determined to break free from the Vanisher's relentless grip, we sought advice from tech experts and cybersecurity specialists. Despite our collective efforts, the mysterious entity continued to haunt us through Snapchat, predicting our every move and wavering a surreal, disconcerting narrative around our lives. As days turned into weeks, the once thriving group of friends found themselves ensnared into a constant state of paranoia. The Vanisher had become an ever-present specter, a digital ghost that defied all attempts of exorcism. Our collective attempts to escape its influence only fueled its persistence, leaving us grappling with an insidious force that seemed to be impervious to reason. Eventually, faced with an unsettling reality of our digital entrapment, we made the difficult decision to abandon our Snapchat accounts altogether. With trepidation, we deleted the app, hoping that severing our ties with this particular digital platform would liberate us from the Vanisher's relentless gaze. In the days that followed, the snaps ceased, and we began our arduous process of rebuilding our lives without the constant surveillance. However, the experience had left a mark on us. We became hyper-aware of our digital presence, questioning the security and privacy of our online interactions. The once distinct line between the virtual and the real had become blurred, and we couldn't shake the feeling that in the vast expanse of the digital landscape, there were entities that transcended the boundaries we once believed to be sacrosanct. Despite our concerted efforts to move on, the unease lingered like a shadow. The absence of the Vanisher snaps did little to quell the underlying fear that our digital lives were still vulnerable to unseen forces. We shared fewer photos, posted sparingly, and even hesitated before sending private messages. The feeling of being constantly observed had etched itself into our collective consciousness. As weeks turned into months, we tentatively rekindled our online presence, cautiously navigating the virtual realm. The specter of the Vanisher had vanished, but the scars remained, a reminder that the digital world held secrets and dangers we were only beginning to understand. In an attempt to gain closure, we revisited the coffee shop where it all began. As we sat around the familiar table, now weathered by time and shared experiences, we recounted the strange saga of the Vanisher. The topic had transformed from a chilling tale to a cautionary fable among us. A narrative that underscored the vulnerability of our digital identities. In the midst of our conversation, a notification pinged on our phones simultaneously. It was a Snapchat notification. A cold shiver ran down our spines. Hesitant glances were exchanged as we reluctantly opened the app. To our surprise, the notification wasn't from the Vanisher, but from an unknown username, the Observer. The chat contained a single message. You can't escape the digital eye. I peered out of my window, watching as the sun slowly set behind the tall trees that lined on our quiet street. As the darkness crept in, a shiver ran down my spine. Lately, my once peaceful neighborhood had become a source of fear and unease. It all started about a week ago, when I found a small doll on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was a misplaced toy from one of the neighboring children. But as the days passed, more and more objects appeared on my doorstep. On the second day, it was a wilted flower with a note attached that read, "For you, my dear Fiona." I brushed it off as a strange prank, but when the third day brought a dead bird, my heart began to race with fear. Each day, the objects became creepier and more disturbing, from jar spiders to a rusty knife. I tried to ignore it, hoping that it would stop, but it only got worse. The objects became more frequent, appearing on my doorstep every morning without fail. And then, I started noticing a figure lingering in the shadows of my street, watching me as I went to collect my eerie gifts. I couldn't make it out who it was, but I could feel their eyes burning into me, a sinister presence that sent chills down my spine. I tried to talk to my neighbors and see if anyone else had been experiencing similar incidents, but they all seemed oblivious to what was happening. It was as if I was the only one being targeted. I started to fear leaving my house or even looking out of my window, but I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. One day, I decided to confront whoever was tormenting me. I waited outside my door, determined to catch them in the act. As the clock struck midnight, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart raced with anticipation and fear as I watched the figure approach my doorstep. But to my surprise, it wasn't a stranger or some masked maniac. It was my neighbor, Mr. Benson. I stared at him in shock as he placed a small box on my doorstep and quickly scurried away. I didn't know what to make of it. I had never really spoken to Mr. Benson before, only exchanging polite greetings and small talk. But now, he was acting strange and leaving these bizarre gifts for me. I cautiously opened the mysterious box, half expecting to find something horrifying inside. But instead, it held a delicate porcelain doll, its face twisted into a menacing smile. Fear and confusion overwhelmed me as I realized that Mr. Benson was behind all of this. But why? The next morning, I decided to confront Mr. Benson and get some answers. I went over to his house and knocked on the door. He answered with a smile, but I could see the hint of something sinister in his eyes. I asked him about the gifts and why he was leaving them for me. He chuckled and invited me inside, claiming it was all just a harmless game. But as I stepped into his house, I realized it was anything but harmless. The walls were covered in photos of me, taken from my bedroom window while I was asleep. He had been watching me all this time, studying my every move. My heart pounded in my chest as he led me deeper into his house, showing off his collection of creepy objects, all with my name on them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mr. Benson had become obsessed with me, fixating getting my attention at any cost. He explained how he'd always noticed me in the neighborhood, and when he saw me find the first gift, he knew he had to keep going to make the gifts creepier and more aggressive for me to notice him. I filled with disgust and terror as he revealed his twisted plan to win my love. But when he started getting angry, accusing me of not appreciating his gifts and not giving him the attention he deserved, he grabbed my arm tightly, and I knew I had to get out of there before things escalated even further. I managed to break free from his grasp and make a run for the door, but he chased after me, calling my name and begging me to stay. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears as I made my way back to the house. I quickly locked all the doors and windows, hoping he wouldn't try to follow me. But the next morning, as I opened the door, I was met with a horrifying sight. My doorstep was covered in blood, and among the red stains were the pieces of my clothes, a lock of my hair, and a note from Mr. Benson proclaiming his love for me and his desire to be with me forever. I couldn't believe this was happening. I called the police and explained everything to them. They seemed Mr. Benson's house and found evidence of his twisted obsession with me. He was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. But the fear and trauma he had caused me would never fully go away. I moved away from that neighborhood, unable to stomach the thought of living anywhere near Mr. Benson. But even now, I can't erase the memories of his sinister gifts and the terror of knowing I was being watched and targeted by my seemingly harmless neighbor. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things can come from the people we least expect. I had just finished mopping the floors after a group of kids spilled their drinks all over the tiles, accidentally having a little bit too much fun at their birthday party. I had been working at McDonald's for 3 years at this point, and pretty much I've seen it all. But at a glance, as I was putting the mop away, I noticed the floor to the employee bathroom was slightly open. Which is strange, it's a very heavy door and it always closes itself. But I couldn't ignore it. I had to investigate. Slowly and cautiously, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The fluorescent light flickered above me, casting eerie shadows on the tiled walls. The bathroom was empty except for a single figure crouched in the corner, his face painted white with a grotesque grin painted red right around the edges. It was Jake, one of the cooks. He was holding a pair of scissors and muttering to himself under his breath. "Jake? Hey man, what are you doing?" I called out to him, my voice wavering. There was no response. I took a step closer, but before I could say anything else, Jake sprung up for the corner and lunged at me, his hands outstretched. I dodged to the side, barely avoiding his grasp. My heart pounced in my chest as I realized that something had seriously gone wrong with my old friend. "Jake, it's me, Tim. You know me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to talk about what's going on. You're not acting like yourself." He continued to advance on me, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Jake, stop," I begged, backing up until my back hit the door. "There's no need for this." As I spoke, he laughed, a maniacal cackle that sent a chill down my spine. There's every need to this, Tim, he hissed, his voice twisted and distorted. I am the Joker, and I'm here to watch the world burn. With that, he lunged at me again, his fingers wrapping tightly around my throat. I struggled for breath, feeling my vision start to fade as my airways closed. Just as I thought it was all over, I felt something cold and metallic press against my back. You're not Joker, Jake, I managed to croak out. You're just some guy who used to work here. He squeezed harder, and my vision went black. In the final moments before I lost consciousness, I heard him laugh again. A horrifying sound that seems to echo through the bathroom and beyond. When I awoke, I found myself lying on the cold floor, my throat burning and my vision blurry. Jake was gone, but the scissors that he had threatened me lay beside me, blood pooling around them. The bathroom was empty, and the only sound was the muffled din of customers in the restaurant. I staggered to my feet, grabbed a handful of paper towels to staunch the flow of blood, and fled the McDonald's, never to return. Word spread quickly, though, the theater about of what happened, and I found myself shunned by my coworkers. No one could believe that Jake, their friend and colleague, could have done something so terrible. But I knew the truth, and it haunted me for days. I saw the way his eyes had turned, the way he moved, the way he'd laughed. There was no doubt in my mind that Jake thought he had become the Joker, and he was out there somewhere, waiting for his next victim. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else going through what I had, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I dug through the employee files until I found Jake's address, and I made the decision. I would confront him. My heart raced as I pulled into the driveway, wondering what I'll find inside. The house was dark and silent, but I knew he was in there somewhere. With a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and walked up to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, then raised my hand to knock. As my knock was connected with the wood, I heard movement inside, and a moment later, Jake answered the door. His face was still painted white, the grin red and twisted. He looked at me with empty eyes. Tim, he said, his voice hoarse and distorted. I've been expecting you. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake, I don't understand what's happening to you. You have to stop this. You're not the Joker. He laughed, a cold and eerie sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Jake, we can get you some help. Find someone who can help you understand what's happening. Jake took a step forward, his eyes boring into mine. There's no help for me, Tim. There is only chaos and destruction and the thrill for the hunt. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke. Jake, please, you don't mean that. You don't want this. You don't want to hurt people. He leaned closer, his breath hot into mine. Oh, but I do, Tim. I just want to watch the world burn. Something snapped inside of me of what happened. I couldn't let him continue, couldn't let him hurt anyone else. With all of my strength, I shoved him backwards, sending him stumbling into the house. I followed him in, my heart racing as I scanned the room for a weapon. When I found a lamp, I raised it above my head, ready to strike. You don't want this, Jake! I shouted. You're still in there, somewhere! He looked at me, those empty eyes still unsettling despite the anger I felt. What do you know of my pain, Tim? Of what it's like to feel the weight of the world on your shoulders? My grip on the lamp tightened. You don't get to decide that, Jake. You don't get to decide who you are anymore. He cocked his head on the side, stunning me for the moment. You know, Tim, I almost feel sorry for you. You're so naive, so certain that there's a way to make everything right. But the truth is, the world is a dark place, and sometimes darkness is all there is.
Jake, please! I just want to help you!
He smiled, a sad and bitter expression. You can't help me, Tim. No one can. With those words, Jake lunged forward, his movement surprisingly quick for someone who looked as frail as he did. Before I could react, he had knocked the lamp from my hands, sending it clattering to the floor. I tried to regain my balance, but he was on me, his hands bony and strong as they locked around my throat. You don't understand, Tim, he whispered on my ear. You can't save me. No one can.